Hello my friends. So here we are continuing on chapter 15 of A Look in the Dark, Irish Secrets. We finished up the last episode with Ricky having decided to go and visit the Bournemouth office of the Geographic Council for Better Understanding. I just pick up the story there. Phoning the Bath National Office, he had located branches around the south coast and decided to pay a visit to the Bournemouth establishment. He had negotiated his way around the one-way system on the motorcycle and located the right building just off the triangle. The first floor premises here was plush, a real contrast with the seemingly more important office in Bath. The rich blue carpets were not at all threadbare, and the furniture was modern and certainly didn't look as if it had been acquired at an auction. It had the feel of a reasonably decent South Coast hotel. He chatted with the receptionist and he asked to speak with someone in authority about a donation. The pretty young girl was efficient but not friendly, but he was soon ushered into a very pleasant office, the occupant of which had his back turned and was talking on the telephone as he looked out through the window. As the man concluded his conversation and turned around, the two occupants of the room recognised each other. Unfazed, Ricky said, Well, if it isn't Brian Balfour. A long time since I saw you, Brian, old chap." "You're right there, Sir Richard." The middle-aged, grey-haired man with rimless glasses and a light blue suit let his eyes dart all over the aristocrat. "So what brings you to our noble charity?" He sat down behind the antique desk that was just a few feet from the sash window. Sit down. Before Ricky took the offered seat, he recalled his previous experience of this proud individual. They had shared a couple of experiences, shipping antiques, especially paintings, out of France. He smiled at this educated crook, but remembered all too well why he had vowed he would never get involved in any venture with him again. "Truth is, Brian, I am charged with distributing a little of the family fortune to deserving charities. And we heard about your lots, and we were thinking it might be one of our worthy causes this year." "Well, that's frightfully good, Sir Richard. Every penny counts." Ricky was sure it did. Brian Balfour had always given him the impression that he was a discontented mongrel trying to be a thoroughbred. It was not that there was a problem with Brian's background. Ricky hadn't a clue what his background was. He just hated people who tried to be what they were not. He viewed the strong London accent of Sue as an important part of what she was, and it presented no hindrance to the affection he felt for her, or for Carol with her Ulster accent. They were what they were, and he was what he was. But he always thought Brian was one thing, pretending to be another, and convinced he was doing a great job at it. But he overdid it. The accent was just overdone, the manners were too precise. He lacked what others would have described as grace and dignity that was seen in Sir Richard. A friendly Cockney newspaper seller would have been much more a gentleman than Brian Balfour could ever be. True, there had been a business connection a few years earlier, but when Brian was sentenced to jail the second time, receiving 8 years for a number of offences, including grievous bodily harm and attempted murder, the aristocrat decided that he could never again work with that kind of person. He might have been fairly adept at locating unusual items for collectors, but enough was enough. Sailing near the edge was one thing, but trying to throw people overboard was quite unacceptable. Ricky had absolutely no time for that. "Well, actually, the family asked me to gather a little more information. They don't like to just dish it out, old man. They like to understand how it will be used." "Yes, quite. Well, it's all very respectable. Those years in prison gave me time to weigh things up a bit." The slightly brown eyes were all over Ricky again, so that he was reminded of searchlights, but scaled down to rat size. "One has to do some good in the world. We aim to increase understanding of people and cultures. Of course, this is not all benevolence. I am paid well for this work, but it's all above board." Brian Balfour didn't want to sound unconvincing by becoming over as an agent of purity. Noble, no doubt. Have you any report of your work that I could take away and show the family? It could mean a very handsome donation." "We're a very new organisation, but we will be producing a report very soon. If I had your address, I could mail it to you." Sir Richard had never trusted Brian enough to bring him back to his home. "No, I won't do that. I'm travelling a lot these days. I think it would be better if I called back in a few weeks. Keep me a copy, will you, Brian?" "Certainly, Sir Richard. With pleasure. Coffee?" Ricky would as soon take an hemlock with Socrates, but he felt a little time might be good, so he accepted the offer. In this case it was the company, not the drink, that was dangerous. As Brian went to the door to ask the young lady on reception to bring 2 copies, Ricky read the names of 2 export and import companies on a document and committed them to his memory. Those few seconds were more valuable than the time sharing a drink with the man, because they gave additional information to the investigation. After a little small talk in which neither man gave anything away, Ricky left, and before he reached the car he arrived at several reasonable conclusions. Unsure about fate, God and all things spiritual, he wasn't sure who to thank, but he expressed mental thanks to whoever for the way things had worked out. He had noticed several South Coast offices for the National Geographic Council, and indeed all over the south of England, and especially wherever there was a university, all except Southampton, that was. He looked at the list and decided Bournemouth would be a good office to visit. Was it just chance that he'd found a member of the violent criminal community who just happened to be an expert on imports and exports of illicit goods in control of this particular branch office that was so plush compared to the head office in Bath? A man who could manage to steal and to ship to France an expensive 15th century 4-poster bed removed from a dealer's home in Surrey was going to be a great help to a man who wanted to ship animals and birds in and out of Britain. He reasoned that he'd walked in on Stanner's shipping agent. Maybe, he thought as he opened the Jaguar door, these 2 unwholesome birds of a feather had become accomplices while they were in prison. Anyway, whatever the truth was, he was pleased to have called at the office in Bournemouth and was able to cast a cloud to be able to cast a cloud of suspicion over a couple of commercial companies, one of which had a Southampton address. The second one was operating out of Falmouth, west in Cornwall. So here he was a few hours later, walking along Weymouth Beach in the moonlight, looking out across the English Channel and wearing a smile as wide as Portland Harbour. "Come home, Danny and Carol, please. I have much to share with you 2. He was also wondering, as he spoke these words to himself, just what they had to relate to him from their investigation in Ireland. The twinkling light splintered into a green and red kaleidoscope on the gentle waves rolling onto the shoreline, and Ricky felt a joy inside like a reflection of that light show. He was feeling that now he had life for real. He'd often tried to make a sum total of what his life was worth. Ever since his romance had ended with such tragedy, he'd been cruising about, half-heartedly looking for some kind of purpose to life. He's raised his hand in protest at the establishment that his parents had carefully trained him to be part of. He'd always been a rebel, but when they sacrificed her, because it was expedient. His hatred of the established order of things had intensified. He was not at all comfortable with the my land, my class, my old school brigade. Yet alternative political ideology left him just as cold. He was not one of those upper-class types who'd strangely been attracted to communism and the Soviet Union. He was lost in a confusion of corruption through the political world, and he refused to support any party, though he had been known to stand up for genuine individuals within different parties. He thought back to his old school days and the holidays from Eton on the family estate, and how much time he'd spent in the gardens with old George Beckham the gardener. That's the head gardener who stayed on long after normal retirement age. He would never have been out of the country but for his part in the war, and his education had been at the village school, and only at the village school, but the wisdom he had and the knowledge concerning acorns, badgers, apple trees, parsnips, sparrowhawks, and the like was priceless. It had had a profound influence on Ricky the boy, and he valued his time with George much more than all his years of education. He still chuckled at the time when Lord and Lady Atterley had been staying with his parents on the estate. At the meal table and other times, 12-year-old Richard had quoted George Beckham a number of times, and the elderly lord said that George Beckham seemed to be a major influence on him. He asked if Mr. Beckham was one of his Eton masters. "No, sir," Ricky replied. "George Beckham is our chief gardener." He still enjoyed the embarrassment of his father over that comment. His father had always been so conscious of rank and class. He was very good to all who worked on his estate, and none of them had any just cause to complain about their employment, and few ever did grumble about anything. However, he certainly didn't consider either his land steward or his tenant farmers to be his equals, and the idea of democracy appealed to him very little. He would have preferred a kind of benevolent feudal system, believing that he had the wisdom required to make the decisions for all under his authority, to protect them from themselves, he said. His second son, Sir Richard Claymore, could never consent to his father's views. But aside from being rebellious and unorthodox, generous and slightly criminal, he couldn't find a place where he could fit in. Now, for the first time, he was feeling different. Now he was working apart from the established order of things to protect something that he cared deeply about. He never felt that he had any particular value, though of course there were plenty who thought he was invaluable. And even those on the edge of the law who'd worked with him knew that he was always more a Robin Hood than an Al Capone type figure. There was something nice though in being able to hand over a complex investigation to the establishment with a kind of "this is what you need to do" attitude that appealed to Ricky. Also, he had a completely clean conscience, whereas whenever he was involved in antiques and collectible skullduggery, there'd been a woodpecker banging away that he tried to ignore. A woodpecker named Conscience, the witness bearer within. Now the woodpecker had flown off, and his comfortable thoughts were dominated instead by a beautiful bird of paradise. Schoolboy-like, Sir Richard picked up a large pebble and threw it toward the twinkling reflections in Weymouth Bay. As it crashed into the gently rolling water in a firework-like display of noise and colour, from his heart he appealed to whom it may concern that now his life could stay like this. Glancing along the beach, he prayed that the silhouetted courting couple 100 metres away might have the happiness together that he had been denied. As the ripples moved closer to his trainer-shod feet where the tide rose gently, Ricky turned his back on the sea and strolled comfortably home to sleep more contentedly than usual. Not like a log, more like a swift asleep on the wing at a very high altitude. He too felt he was flying very high, and that his ability to fly was tuned up as it had never been since his youth. So Richard's enjoying his part in the investigation. He's doing something of worth. We all like to feel like that, don't we? And I'm sure you're doing things of worth, things that are close to your heart that you really care about. And I know I am too. Kate and I would like to send you all our love, to wish you all peace, and to thank you once again for listening to this story. Next episode to follow shortly, I hope. Goodbye, my friends, wherever you are. Thank you. Bye-bye.